So this week I have the film I have been looking forward to almost all year. I have Rogue One. It is the first of the anthology Star Wars films. And I'll start by saying I'm going to go completely spoiler-free with this. I was excited but worried as to how it would sort of fit into the Star Wars universe because this film sits in between the events of the original trilogy and maybe a little bit after Episode 3. I think it carried a ton of responsibility because Episode 7 sort of restored our faith in the fact that you can still make an enjoyable Star Wars movie nowadays, but it still raised the question of, can a film consisting of mostly characters we don't know kind of resonate with us? It was directed by Gareth Edwards, who definitely deserves a shout out because I thought he did an amazing job. Its cast is amazing. It's got Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, Donnie Yen, Riz Ahmed, Forrest Whitaker, Alan Tudyk, and Mads Mikkelsen. I gotta say, this film is kind of dark, and don't let this be your first Star Wars movie. If you aren't really familiar with the events of the original movies, it doesn't really do a ton to try and onboard you, and that actually might have been my biggest criticism for it. It just kind of dives right in, which as a Star Wars fan was really cool, but again, if you aren't really a huge fan or you've never seen a Star Wars movie, this really can't be your first film. There were so many great Easter eggs and references for fans. Every once in a while, I'd turn to the people with me and just sort of shake them a little bit, like, oh my god, did you see that? I really actually loved how they tied it into the universe. It was interesting because it actually gave extra meaning to some of the kind of questionable plot moments in the original trilogy, which I thought was a very clever way to address it. I thought, the whole thing is visually very consistent with the Star Wars universe, and I thought that it's a great action movie, so if you aren't a super fan, but you're kind of a fan, this one actually does well to sort of stay within the universe, but kind of be its own standalone, which sounds contradictory, but it accomplishes it really well. This movie's only been out, 12 hours or so at this point, maybe a little more, and people are already sort of arguing over, what place it holds in the Star Wars universe ranking, and I've already gotten at least one fight over it, but I think other people really enjoyed it as well, and I think fans and non-fans alike are going to enjoy it. Again, I think it skews a little bit more towards, hey, you have to have a knowledge of this, and as I said, it's pretty dark. It's not the most kid-friendly, not that all the Star Wars movies are particularly kid-friendly, but this one, I think, skewed a little bit more towards the PG-13, adult audience. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it was disappointing at all. It's a fun action movie. It's a great Star Wars movie. I think probably everyone will go see this, so I don't really need to convince anyone to go see it. I think the only question was, hey, is it good or no? Does it do a fan service? And I think it absolutely does that. So I'm going to give this one 4.2 Mohawks. Also this week, if you are not a Star Wars fan or couldn't get tickets, this is a great alternative film. Actually, it's just a great film on its own. It's La La Land, which is a musical starring Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. The thing is getting a lot of hype, so I suggest you kind of try and moderate your expectations. It's very indulgent in sort of this wish fulfillment, and it actually reminds me of those old school sort of Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, and Gene Kelly films. I gotta say, the two leads are much better actors than they are dancers, and they're better dancers than they are singers, and they do all three in this film. That's not to say that, they're terrible, any of them, because they're great actors, but the singing was, a little rough. Luckily, John Legend shows up at one point, and it's just amazing. He wrote an original song for it, and it's fantastic. But they're all charming nonetheless, so they totally carry the film. The midpoint was really where it picked up for me. The intro was, a little much. It was very, not generic, but it was very what does this have to do with the plot? It's very sort of meet cute. It's not until they sort of stopped trying so hard, I want to say, that the film really picked up. For me personally, I know a lot of people were sort of enthralled from the beginning, but for me, it was okay, let's calm it down a little bit and let's get into sort of the meat of their relationship. I thought it was a great exploration of sort of the idea of what if and where your life takes you. It's also a bit of a love story to LA. I think my only sort of qualms with it were it was a little bit long, and again, it's a little much in the beginning. It took me a while to realize that the film takes place in modern day, they have iPhones. I thought they were trying to go for some sort of 50s thing, so they go for a 50s feel, but in modern day LA where people drive Priuses, and it's a little bit strange in that sense, but overall, I think people are really resonating with this film. Again, the entire third act for me was really where it got me, and I was this is actually a really, really sweet film. So I'm gonna give this one 4.1 mohawks. Finally, I have what I think is actually going to be my lowest rated film ever, which is really disappointing. It's called Collateral Beauty, and to quote from one of my favorite Star Wars characters, Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. I was super excited to see this movie. It has so much star power in it. It has Will Smith, and he plays a character who lost his daughter, which isn't a spoiler, it's in the trailers, and he writes letters to death, love, and time. And then this ridiculously convoluted plot ensues, and I feel like the cast should be ashamed. They're all stars. It's Helen Mirren, it's Kate Winslet, it's Edward Norton, it's Kiera Knightley, and Michael Pena. Let me just say this. I sincerely hope never to have enemies as horrible as Will Smith's character's friends are, even though they're supposedly well-meaning. The plot made no sense. The whole thing is really emotionally manipulative. I'm not really sure who they're trying to target with this audience, because it's the storyline about a dead child is that's so upsetting and emotional, but the rest of it is just this weird sort of metaphysical, but maybe not. And the whole thing just refuses to commit, which was my other frustration with it. Either go with one plot point or go with another, and I'm not gonna say what they are in case somebody decides to see it, but really, this film is just not good, and considering the people in it, that's just such a disappointment. The only reason I'm not going to give it 0 mohawks, because if you cut out all the other scenes, Will Smith, he gives these heartwarming performances, and I feel like he wanted it to be an Oscar vehicle, and it is absolutely not going to be that for him, which is too bad, because I think if it had been different, this film could have been a great movie, but it is not, so I'm only going to give it 1.7 mohawks.